Hello everyone, this is Doe welcoming you back to my channel for another sort of Convallaria video. This will be the first of a three-part series where we break down the tier list I've been working on. In today's video, we'll be categorizing units based on their roles, such as physical single-target DPS, physical AoE DPS, and more. Keep in mind, this tier list isn't meant to be a gospel, but rather a guide to help you evaluate the best units in their respective roles. My goal is to help you plan out your pool priorities more effectively. Speaking of priorities, we'll also be releasing follow-up videos covering pool recommendations based on different spending levels. For that, I'll be collaborating with havvky, who will provide insights for free-to-play, monthly pass, and double pass buyers. This is important because this tier list assumes each unit at their peak potential with their optimal team, best astral gears, and ideal setup. There's a lot to go over, so let's jump right in. The first category we'll be covering is physical single-target DPS units. The ranking in this category is based on two key factors: their ability to dish out the highest damage within a single turn, and their ability to maintain consistent damage output over multiple turns. At the top of the category, Estra takes the crown as the absolute best physical single-target DPS unit. She delivers extremely high sustained damage over multiple turns, making her the gold standard for this role. Next we have Tristan, our Berserker Mama. Her single target build can deal damage comparable to Estra, but only while she remains in her Berserk state, making her slightly more situational. Following them is Lutfi, who shines when focusing on a single target, dealing great damage with his ultimate attack. At tier 0.5, August comes next, leveraging his rage mechanics to dish out significant damage. While he can sustain his output in longer fights, he cannot deal consistent high damage every turn due to his skill cooldowns. Then we have Safiya, the Queen of Marks. She excels in single-target damage, but her effectiveness can be hindered in fights where HP percentage damage reduction is present, as it severely limits her overall output. All units in Tier 0 and 0.5 are top-tier choices for boss fights as the primary DPS of your team. At Tier 1, Agatha, our Wolfie Mommy, stands out with her ability to apply wound and piercing damage in a single action. SP Rawiyah is a unit I've tested as a single-target DPS. While she can deal decent damage, her single-target build forces her to rely on Hunting Impulse and Void Slash to fully capitalize on her Act Again trait. Homa serves as a fantastic sub-DPS, working alongside her bird companion while providing support for other physical DPS units. She is particularly strong against enemies with magic shields, thanks to a passive that increases her attack by 30% and allows her to ignore enemy defense through shield break. Shaklulu is a highly mobile sub-DPS, utilizing bee sting mechanics that function similarly to Agatha's wound mechanic. At Tier 1.5, Team Meteor is a high-mobility single-target DPS unit. Their main drawback is that their attacks only function in a straight line, similar to Leonide. Kia can perform as a tank DPS, but she shines better in a later category due to her ability to grant resolve to allies. While she brings solid utility, her damage output isn't as high as the previous units mentioned. Layla is the best alert physical DPS in the game, but when it comes to damage per turn in boss fights, she isn't as impressive compared to higher tier units. Lastly, in Tier 2, most units in this tier struggle to compete with the higher ranked DPS units in tough boss fights, but can still function as sub-DPS options. Many of them will gain unique rank 13 skills in the future, improving their damage output per turn, but even at their absolute best, they still fall short compared to the stronger units in this category. Moving on to physical AoE DPS, SP Rawiyah takes the crown with her ability to act again every turn. Both her ultimate attack and Gale Dance combined with Gale Sword make her the best at clearing mobs on the battlefield. No one compares to her as a physical AoE DPS. In Tier 0.5, we have August, who also has Act Again mechanics with some AoE capabilities. On top of that, his ultimate attack deals decent area of effect damage. However, his skill cooldowns and energy requirements place him below Rawiya, as he cannot consistently perform AoE attacks twice per turn. At Tier 1, we have Agatha with Queen's Announcement, which deals area of effect damage followed by piercing damage in a single action. Gloria follows Agatha as a great sub-DPS in this category with her Full Moon and Spear Throw. Pamina, my favorite general in the game, brings multiple AoE counterattacks. As much as I love Pamina, her use case is quite niche, which is why she is placed at the bottom of Tier 1. Next we have Homa, who can deal decent area of effect damage when positioned correctly. This limitation places her in Tier 1.5. The rest of the units in Tier 2 have limited area of effect damage potential, and their overall damage output is outshined by the higher ranked units in this category. On the flip side, we have our Mary Sue, SP Inanna, climbing to the top of the tier in multiple categories, including both magical DPS categories. She outshines everyone with her ability to amplify her damage output when using her AoE attack on a single enemy, while her ultimate attack obliterates enemies. Her physical to magical damage conversion and her Act Again mechanics secure her spot at the top of this category. Standing beside her is her steadfast and loyal bodyguard Aisha, who not only strengthens SP Inanna further, but can also deal up to 500,000 damage per turn, making her a powerhouse in her own right. At Tier 0.5, Team Meteor is also capable of solid single-target magical damage when built for magic. However, they are rated lower due to their attack limitations requiring straight-line targeting, and they are simply outshined by SP Inanna and Aisha. At Tier 1 we have Nungal, formerly known as a boss killer. However, her limited movement and inability to sustain high damage output over multiple turns consecutively place her here instead of a higher tier. Following Nungal is Beryl, whose single-target magical attacks are solid, but her overall damage output isn't as high as the other top-tier units in this category. At Tier 1.5, Hasna excels at sniping targets from a distance with a respectable amount of magical damage, thanks to her critical stacking mechanics. She is followed by Luvita, who specializes in AoE magic DPS with Ignite mechanics. Unfortunately, her single target damage doesn't measure up to the rest of the units in this category. Next is Momo, whose single target alert attacks are powerful, but they aren't well suited for boss fights, limiting her effectiveness in this category. The rest of the Tier 2 units have limited capacity for single target magical damage. Akambe can occasionally deal high burst damage against shielded enemies, while base form Inanna gains a magical offensive skill from SP Inanna, making her a decent sub-DPS for magical teams. For magical AoE DPS, SP Inanna once again takes the top spot for the same reason as her single-target magical capabilities, especially when combined with her own Astral Gear Sword and Tristan's Blood Luxite Amulet. Her ability to obliterate enemies with massive area of effect magic damage makes her unparalleled in this role. Following her in Tier 0.5 is Luvita, whose chain reaction AoE attacks can devastate hordes of enemies when they are positioned well, while her ability to amplify her damage on burning tiles gets her the next best AoE magical DPS spot. Aisha also lands in this tier due to her more consistent AoE attacks and her physical to magical damage conversion, making her an incredibly reliable magic AoE DPS option. At the top of Tier 1 we have Karis, who boasts an ultra-wide AoE magical attack that can hit multiple enemies at once. She is followed by Tristan, whose AoE magic damage output comes from explosive Luxite dust combined with controlled demolition. However, her damage in clearing mobs pales in comparison to the higher tier units. Her one-punch burial can deal massive damage when paired with her amulet and synergized with her unlimited resolve, but its reliance on push mechanics and her berserk state limitations makes her AoE more niche. At tier 1.5, we have Akambe, the game's first summoner. While he can deal good AoE damage, he requires far more setup and strategy to reach his full potential, making him less practical than the other top-tier units. Beryl, while much more straightforward to use, has an AoE damage output that is simply outshined by the units ranked above her. As for tier 2 units, their AoE magical DPS capabilities are more niche. Alexei ranks at the bottom of the list since he isn't built for magic damage. His lack of physical to magical damage conversion prevents him from competing with the rest of the units in this category, placing him at the lowest tier. Next we have the piercing and damage over time category. Units in this category are rated based on their overall damage output and efficiency in applying piercing and DoT effects in a given turn. It's important to note that different units scale their piercing damage off different factors. Likewise, DoT mechanics like Scorch and Infection scale differently from Ignite and Life Loss. By definition, piercing damage directly reduces the target's HP while ignoring defense and normal damage modifiers. Some units can amplify the piercing damage modifier, which we'll discuss later. Additionally, piercing damage is coded to never land a critical hit. Scorch and Infection scale off the enemy's total HP, making them susceptible to common HP percentage damage reduction mutations. On the other hand, Life Loss and Ignite depend on the modifiers of the specific unit, making them more stable sources of DoT. At the very top of this category, Kaver takes the crown. Almost his entire kit revolves around piercing damage and DoT, and when combined with his Shadow Puppet staff, he further increases piercing damage received by enemies by 15% through a unique weapon debuff. Both his direct piercing attacks and life loss effects scale off his magic attack stat. His highly specialized piercing and DoT kit makes him unparalleled in this category. Lutfi follows as the Prince of DoT, thanks to his access to Ignite, Scorch, and Life Loss, all of which are further amplified through his trait. His life loss effect scales off his physical attack stat, making him an incredibly strong hybrid damage dealer. Afra is next, with piercing damage that scales off her magic attack stat. She also has the ability to record and repeat damage taken by the enemy, making her piercing DPS potential dependent on the overall damage output of her team. In a strong party, her total damage scales significantly. Meanwhile, Agata deals self-reliant piercing damage, as her piercing scales off her total HP. Her built-in wound status effect further multiplies her total piercing damage, making her a strong and action-efficient unit. This high action economy puts her on par with Afra in different situations. At the bottom of this tier, Levita enters with Ignite mechanics that scale off her attack stat. Kia has piercing damage mechanics that are less efficient than the units ranked above her. Her piercing scales off her HP, while her DoT is affected by HP percentage damage reduction mutations, limiting her consistency. Karis has a more straightforward piercing damage mechanic that scales off her magic attack. Additionally, she possesses an aura for Papal faction units, which increases piercing damage dealt by Papal allies. Unfortunately, her piercing damage isn't as high as other units previously mentioned. Shaklulu follows with piercing damage centered around her bee-sting mechanics, which scale off her physical attack stat. Her DoT effect is based on infection, making it susceptible to HP percentage modifiers. At the bottom of this tier, we have base form Safiya. Her piercing damage from Settlement of the Hangman scales off the enemy's HP. While her follow-up attacks from her trait are not technically classified as piercing damage, they also rely on the enemy's HP stat. This makes her highly vulnerable to HP percentage damage reduction modifiers, which are very common in tougher stages. Because of this limitation, she is placed at the bottom of this tier. However, in battles where this modifier isn't an issue, she can easily be one of the best single-target piercing hybrid DPS units. The rest of the units in this category have limited access to piercing damage skills and mostly rely on DoT effects that are often affected by HP percentage damage modifiers, with the exception of Tristan, and the value of their action economy. Simply put, amplifiers are units that excel in offensive support. Now let's move on to the support categories. I've broken support units into two categories, starting with amplifiers. Amplifiers are support units that may or may not be DPS themselves, but provide skills, traits, and mechanics that amplify the overall damage dealt by the team in a given turn. Units in this category are rated based on the strength of their relevant skills and the value of their action economy. Simply put, amplifiers are units that excel in offensive support. SP Inanna sits at the top with her unparalleled ability to boost the entire team's attack and defense through multiple auras, her ability to implant Convallaria flag that stacks on top of her aura, and additional buffs from co-attack and co-defense. On top of that, her free will mechanics allow her to cast Pursuit Order on allies, letting them act again while gaining energy without costing her a turn, unlike her base form. She also has access to multiple damage increasing buffs. Her extremely high action economy earns her the highest spot in this category. Lutfi excels at debuffing enemies simply by existing. He is one of only 2 units in the game that can inflict vulnerable 3. His edge over Nonowil is that his debuff is part of a passive skill, meaning all he has to do is end his turn to inflict vulnerable 3, allowing him to use his turn for other actions. He also possesses 2 auras, one that boosts units from the Alacrity faction and another that increases the critical hit rate and critical damage of allies within a certain range. Additionally, he applies random level 2 debuffs on enemies with his basic attacks. Due to his trait, he also removes alert effects on enemies and applies more random level 2 debuffs at the start of his turn. His high action economy for weakening enemies' defenses places him on par, though in reverse, with Inanna, who excels at buffing allies. SP Sophia is another powerhouse amplifier. She provides strong team buffs, but her core mechanic as an amplifier revolves around follow-up attacks, ordering teammates to assist out of their turns, repositioning allies to help short-range DPS units, and utilizing her Astral Sword to grant a unique weapon buff that increases allies' damage dealt by 15%. This stacks with her trait, which increases supporting attack damage, alert skill effectiveness, and piercing damage dealt by 25%. Her highly efficient action economy and exclusive ability to coordinate attacks outside of turns earn her a spot in Tier 0. Tahir also earns a Tier 0 spot due to the number of instant skills he has access to and his unmatched ability to speed tune an entire team. His Caged Reverie further enhances the overall outgoing damage of the team. Every unit in Tier 0 has mechanics that are highly efficient and unique to them. Moving to Tier 0.5, Kaveh takes the top spot in offensive support thanks to his great buffs and debuffs, most notably his ability to increase the piercing damage received by enemies. Homa follows with her combination of movement boosts and the strongest physical defense debuff. Agatha makes her mark with her wound mechanics, which efficiently stack damage over time. Edda provides powerful damage buffs and has exclusive access to wine tiles, which significantly boost outgoing magic damage for an entire team. She also functions as a solid sub-DPS through her follow-up attack mechanics. Coco supports her team through numerous damage-modifying buffs like Snow Lotus and critical buffs through Iron Pot Stew. Her happiness mechanics further enhance team performance by reducing energy costs and cooldowns, making her highly versatile. At Tier 1, base form Inanna offers strong co-attack and co-defense buffs, but her most notable contribution is her Act Again ability. When combined with her SP form mechanics, she enables devastating turn-over-turn damage output. Gloria follows with her faction and flag aura, as well as access to damage reduction and energy recovery buffs. Though newer units have outshined her support capabilities, her action economy and capacity as a sub-DPS keep her in Tier 1. Afra supports her team by increasing the vulnerability of enemies to piercing damage and leveraging her team's total damage as her own. Her mechanics are quite complex, and I may adjust her ranking relative to Gloria in the future. Tier 1.5 begins with Momo, whose passive skill increases the DoT damage dealt to enemies by 30%. Karis can be a great support in magic-focused teams due to her access to the strongest magic defense debuff applied through an AoE attack. Nonoel was the first unit to have access to Vulnerable 3, but her ranking has significantly dropped because Lutfi is far more efficient at applying increased damage modifiers. Hasna's Fragrance mechanics boost the team's overall damage by increasing attack and critical rates. Magnus provides a similar role, with a Fortitude aura that grants allies toughness. Akambe excels as a damage support unit by offering strong AoE buffs that increase both attack and defense. His buff skill also greatly enhances the damage output of summoned allies. While he isn't a top-tier support for general teams, he is an outstanding pick for summoner-based compositions. Additionally, his ability to gather enemies while applying magic defense debuffs makes him a great choice for a magic-focused team. The rest of the Tier 2 characters, aside from Layla and Dantalion, who offer decent faction auras and team teleportation, have very limited amplifying skills compared to the units ranked above them. Finally, we have the Sustain category, which includes support units with defensive capabilities. Units in this category are rated based on their ability to keep the team healthy and help them survive incoming damage. This category includes buffers and debuffers with relevant skills, healers, and tanks. At the top, SP Inanna stands out with her ability to efficiently apply damage reduction while also buffing the team. Flavia follows as a summoner specializing in keeping the team alive through her flower tile mechanics. Her kit includes physical shields based on 100% of her magic attack stat, attack down debuffs on enemies, and physical and magical defense buffs for allies. Tyre's exclusive access to Caged Reverie mechanics for damage reduction and damage distribution places him among the best defensive support units. Coco's Iron Pot Stew is one of the strongest healing skills in the game, offering a wide AoE range. Additionally, she has access to multiple instant healing skills and is also one of the top tanks, capable of protecting allies while healing herself as she absorbs incoming damage. At Tier 0.5, Layla's Alert skill provides strong zoning capabilities, along with her ability to reduce incoming party-wide damage and apply a unique piercing damage reduction buff. Aisha is the game's best tank for single-unit protection. When paired with her Astral Gear Sword and Shield of Justice, along with her self-sustain mechanics, she can effectively protect fragile glass cannon DPS units without much risk to herself. Afra brings a mix of defense buffs and healing mechanics in her kit, offering a strong blend of sustain and support. Base form Inanna also provides solid defensive utility with Flight of the Princess, reliable AoE healing, and code defense buffs. At Tier 1, Karis offers team-wide sustain through AoE magic shields, regeneration, and bound immunity. Magnus and Hasna contribute by boosting overall team defense through their trait effects. Kia is another strong sustain unit, providing single-target healing, tanking damage herself, and granting resolve to allies for added survivability. At Tier 1.5, Kaveh has limited sustain options to help his teammates, focusing more on offensive support. Pamina, as the game's only taunt tank before Guzman receives his rank 13 skill, earns a spot in this category. Her ability to redirect enemy attacks to herself while maintaining her own HP allows the team to withstand waves of incoming enemies. Alexi stands out with his rare attack debuff 3, which significantly weakens enemies. His ability to transform tiles into ice tiles also provides strong zoning control and limits enemy movement. SP Sophia offers decent global auto-healing, but its restriction to only 2 units prevents her from ranking higher in this category. Homa and Agatha share similar healing capabilities, but their healing is locked into specific builds that may not always be viable, placing them at the bottom of Tier 1.5. The remaining units in Tier 2 have healing, defensive buffs, and auras that struggle to keep up with the demands of tougher stages. However, Simona stands out with her strong zoning capabilities through Ice Wall and her ability to grant an AoE physical shield. While some of these units may still have niche uses, their overall effectiveness in sustain roles has been outclassed by higher tiered units. So that's all for today. A big shout out to everyone who contributed to the research and creation of this tier list. Your support and insights have been invaluable in putting this together. I've also included priority suggestions for free-to-play, monthly pass, and dual pass buyers, which Hockey will be covering. I'll be following up with priority suggestions for low, mid, and high spenders, where I'll go into more detail on recommended star levels, astral shard, and cornucopia fruit usage, and astral gear choices based on different spending levels. I'll also try to include relevant footage where possible, so stay tuned for those in the next few days. This video is sponsored, so if you haven't downloaded the game yet, use the link in the description to support the channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more content like this. Stay cool, stay crispy. This is DoT signing off. See you in the next video.